The Rangers get blatantly outworked by the Pittsburgh Penguins and suffer a demoralizing 3-2 loss. We are calling out everyone, and is Laviolette's job potentially on the line against the Jackets?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1243 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, oh boy, where do we even start with this one? Just another disheartening, rough, inexplicable loss in a season that is absolutely jam-packed with them. And this is the latest offense, a 3-2 home loss against the Pittsburgh Penguins, a game that I think was defined more than anything by the very simple fact that the Rangers just got completely and totally outworked, outfought, outcompeted at every single moment of this game. It can't happen. I mean, it really shouldn't happen ever. 82 games, that's a long season. If it happens like 3 or 4 times, okay, fine, whatever. I'm not going to like nitpick to that extreme. Every team's going to have a bad game from time to time. But again, this, as we've talked about on here, has basically become the norm and what the Rangers are. You know, they routinely have games like this where you just can't believe that they lose. You can't believe the lack of focus, the lack of attention to details, all things that were a strength last season. It's just evaporated this season. And you come into this game and you're up against the Pittsburgh Penguins, one of the few teams, by the way, that is actually behind you in the Eastern Conference standings. But you're playing the Penguins, no Malkin. He's been out for a while, but still no Malkin and no Crosby. Crosby missing his first game since the Rangers-Penguins playoff series a handful of seasons ago. And I think for a lot of us, like Ranger fans, that was sort of a headline grabber. You know, you're playing the Penguins and it's a big game and the Rangers have to win this and they have to get 2 points and they should be able to do that really under any circumstances. But the fact that they don't have Crosby and they don't have Malkin, I think that makes it even more of a situation where it's like, okay, we got to win this game. We really should win this game. And in a really strange way, I feel like the fact that the Penguins didn't have Crosby, they didn't have Malkin, I think that actually worked against this Ranger team, which sounds strange on the surface, but really think about what we've seen from this Ranger team this season. Think of like just how they've been wired in a really strange way and having these games that they just take off and all these mental lapses and everything else. I honestly believe that what could have very well happened here, the Rangers know they're playing the Penguins. Hey, we've won 2 in a row. We're going up against this team that isn't having a very good season. They don't even have their 2 best forwards. So we're on an easy streak tonight. We're just going to coast our way to a nice, easy win. And no, doesn't work that way. Not in the National Hockey League. And I don't know for sure if that's what the Rangers were thinking. I'm not in the locker room. I don't know what these guys say to each other. But if anybody on that team had that mindset, had that mentality coming into this game, then shame on them for doing that. That's certainly what it looked like because, again, the Rangers just looked like they didn't want to work for it. They figured they could just out-talent their way past the Penguins. By the way, out-talenting teams, how's that worked out so far for the Rangers this season? And keep in mind, we're down to less than 30 games to go here, and it seems like they still haven't learned their lesson in that regard. But there were endless examples in this game of the Rangers being outworked. There were lazy penalties by the Rangers in this game. We'll elaborate on that one in a little bit. We're going to have an entire section where we highlight some of the mistakes that the Rangers made in this game. But you just look at the entire game flow here. The Penguins were just skating harder, competing better than the Rangers were. The Rangers just didn't want to shoot the puck. Just didn't feel like shooting the puck tonight. Didn't want to do it. The final shots on goal doesn't look that bad. It was 26-24 in favor of the Penguins. And that also is a byproduct of the fact that the Penguins did not have a single shot on goal in the third period. But when you look at shots attempted, I mean, for the majority of this game, the Penguins had the Rangers beat by like a 3-to-1 ratio. And again, because of the third period, the Penguins sitting back, that did come back to earth at least a little bit. But that shots attempted stat, while I don't live and die by that, it told you everything you needed to know about this game, about how much time the Penguins were spending in the Rangers zone, how hard they were working to keep offensive zone possessions alive, and how much the Rangers were back on their heels and how much they were not doing that whenever the Rangers, on the rare occasion, did get the puck into the Penguins zone. Just weren't working for it, weren't getting those second chance opportunities, just weren't shooting the puck. I mean, it was ridiculous. They had like 7 shot attempts the entire first period, and it didn't really get a whole lot better after that. I mean, toward the end, they were pressing a little bit because, 2 or 3 minutes ago, oh, right, we got to play hockey. We got to try to win this game, and they end up falling a little bit short. But the part of this game, I just wanted to throw this out there too, where I really knew that the Rangers were in trouble. It might not be what you think. It was actually after the Rangers scored. It was after the Adam Fox goal in the second period. I knew, honestly, just by my reaction, my own reaction, that the Rangers might be in some trouble here. Now, on one hand, you score the goal, you're up 2-1. It's a good thing, right? You got the lead. Maybe you can kind of just find your game from that point on, go on to win this game and get the 2 points. But when Fox scored that goal, it was the first Ranger shot on goal, and it might have been the first Ranger shot attempt of the second period. And that occurred about 5, 6, 7 minutes into the second period there, give or take. The Penguins were skating circles around the Rangers at the start of that period. They scored a goal to tie it at 1-1. And then this goal by Fox put the Rangers back up 2-1. But I'm sitting here watching this, and I see Fox score this goal. And as much as I want to feel good about this, as much as I want to get excited, I'm not feeling good, and I don't get excited because this goal really just kind of came out of nowhere, and maybe a little bit of a softie against Nedeljkovic. Not, ridiculously soft, but I think he probably could have come up with that one. But this goal gets scored, and I'm looking at it, and I'm just like, you know what? Great, but this doesn't do anything to change the fact that this Ranger team is getting outcompeted, outworked, and outplayed at every single turn. Even the Rangers' reaction to this goal, you look at the players on the ice, and they kind of just look tired, like relieved that the shot went in. Not that you got to go nuts every time you score a goal, but the celebration just seemed a little bit off to me. The focus just was not there in this game. And again, this goal should have made me feel good, should have made a lot of you feel good. I'd be curious to know if you had like a similar ominous feeling when this goal was scored, because as far as go-ahead goals in the second period goes, this is about as unexcited as I've been about one of them the entire season, because the Rangers really didn't deserve to be winning at this point, but they were. And as it turns out, it didn't matter. Penguins came back and largely dominated the second period and then just shut the Rangers down in the third period. But we're going to keep everything going in just a second here. I want to shift our attention to just the Rangers, the amount of mistakes that they made in this game. I mean, in a way, we've already covered some of that, but we're going to really do some deep dives in just a second here. And there's one Ranger in particular that we're going to call out at the end of the upcoming section. So, yep, we'll do all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by our very good friends over at Gametime. Looking for tickets for your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it has never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so that you do not have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of endless tickets. And the best part, you are covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they will refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers. As always, the Rangers are going to play against the Blue Jackets on the road on Saturday at 7 p.m. That is the last Ranger game before the break for the Four Nations. After the Jackets game, it's going to be exactly 2 weeks until the Rangers once again play. That will be Saturday the 22nd at the Sabres at 5:30. But as for this game, too many mistakes and just a bunch of boneheaded mistakes, if we're being completely honest, by this Ranger team. We had a too many men penalty on the Rangers because no brutal Ranger loss is ever really complete without one of those, right? I got to look this up. There's got to be a website that keeps track of this. In my mind, and maybe I'll be surprised, who knows? But in my mind, there is no way the Rangers don't either lead the league in too many men on the ice penalties or they're right there. They got to be right up near the top as far as leading the league in these penalties. And I get the feeling most of the teams that are at or near the top of this list, I don't know this for sure, but I get the feeling that most of the teams at or near the top of this list are probably teams on the outside of the playoff picture looking in, because it's just a sign of sloppy, undisciplined, and lazy hockey. Mark your guy, know when you're going onto the ice. It's really not that complicated. This shouldn't be happening 2/3 of the way through the NHL season. Get it together and stop taking these penalties. You can accept that penalties are going to happen. I'm completely done. One more too many men on the ice penalty for the Rangers might break me. And they didn't even give up a goal on this one. They did kill off the penalty, but I don't care because it still takes the wind out of your sails. It still puts you back on your heels. And if you're doing anything well 5v5, which actually, now that I'm thinking about it, was not the case for the Rangers in this game, but in a normal game where, it's back and forth a little bit and maybe you're doing some good things 5v5, you take that penalty, now all of a sudden you're back on your heels for the next 2 minutes. And again, it just kind of takes the wind out of your sails. So there's just no excuse for this. They got to figure this out. But I'm not exactly holding my breath because, again, 50-something games into the season, whatever it is at this point, I don't think they're going to correct these kinds of mistakes that they've been making the entire season over and over and over again. But it wasn't just the too many men on the ice penalty. Just lazy penalties in this game. 2 offensive zone penalties against the Rangers. The first one was against Will Cooley. He trips his guy in the offensive zone. And honestly, Cooley was probably one of the better Rangers on the ice in this game. Not that that's setting the bar very high, but you can't do this. I mean, he's got to know better than this. I know he's trying to strip the puck and try to make a play, but he trips his guy, and it was a penalty. It gets called. And this one led to what turned out to be the game-winning goal for the Penguins. They score on the power play. They make the score 3-2, and that's that. And the Rangers never came back. That was the end of the goal scoring in this game. And then this is a little bit later in the second period. And the second period was just awful, by the way. This was not a good game in general for the Rangers, but my God, the second period was an absolute disaster. Now you have Riley Smith with just a lazy tripping penalty in the offensive zone. And again, I think he's trying to make a play. He's trying to make something happen, but you can't do this. You have to know better than this. And once this penalty was called, the Garden faithful, the fans, they were all booing. And again, I don't know this for sure. And with that many fans booing, it's possible that different fans are booing for different reasons. It felt to me, though, that the fans weren't necessarily booing the tripping call against Smith. They were booing the trip by Smith. They didn't like the fact that it's in the offensive zone. You're at a critical juncture in this game. The fans are already fed up with how this game has gone, and I don't blame them. And now you've got a lazy, undisciplined, unnecessary offensive zone tripping penalty. And I don't think they were directing it at Riley Smith per se. I think any Ranger that did this, the reaction was going to be the same. The fans were going to boo. But again, my big takeaway here, I don't think they were booing the call. I think they were booing the penalty itself, that it just didn't need to happen, and the Ranger effort and execution to that point in the game. And again, the Rangers do kill this off, but you're constantly back on your heels, and you take these penalties. It's just indicative of a team that doesn't know what it's doing, taking all these bad penalties that it just does not need to take. So there's some mistakes right there where we're through the penalty portion. Let's look at the other side of the coin as it pertains to special teams. Let's look at the Ranger power play. Once again, it looks completely lost. Now, granted, they didn't get any power plays in this game until about 8 or 9 minutes remained, and then they got 2 from that point on. So they had 4 minutes of power play time to potentially find the equalizer in this game. And they got, in those 4 minutes, the 4 minutes of power play time there, take a guess how many shots on goal the Rangers got in those 2 power plays combined. I'll give you a quick second, get a number in your head, try to think about what you saw here, try to think just how awesome this Ranger power play was, and try to think how many shots on goal. Okay, the amount of shots on goal that they got in those 2 power plays combined was 1. 1 shot on goal. You're in a situation here where you're at the end of the game, you're down by a goal, you're, I think, desperate to win this game. You wouldn't know it from watching these Ranger players, but given where we are in the season, where the Rangers are in the standings, you would assume that this team is desperate for a win. You're trailing by a goal. You need the equalizer. You've got 2 power plays. I wouldn't say back-to-back, but they weren't too far away from each other either. And they get 1 shot on goal. And keep in mind, the second of these 2 power plays was basically a 6-on-4 for just about the entirety of it. The Rangers, once they got possession of the puck after the faceoff, Igor went off the ice. They bring in the extra skater, and even then, with a 6-on-4 for a full 2 minutes, the Rangers in those last two power plays combined amassed a grand total of 1 shot on goal. But you know what? Hey, nobody wanted to shoot the puck in this game anyway, at even strength or the first period or the second period. So why would it really change in the third period, late in the third period, on the power play? What difference does it make? Nobody on the Rangers wanted to shoot the puck, which is disheartening to say the least. And all this nonsense that I'm talking about right now and all this poor play, it led to a couple of big name players losing some pretty considerable ice time in this game. I thought this was kind of interesting. One thing that I noticed about midway through this game was that the Ranger fourth line seemed to be playing a little bit more often than usual. And you see that and you figure, okay, well, if those guys are getting ice time, then somebody is losing some ice time. And you look at the final time on the ice, VZ ends up with 10:11, Carrick ends up with 10:32, Rempe got 8:34. That's more than those guys usually get. I mean, maybe Carrick notwithstanding, I'd have to look that up to know for sure. But, you know, Sam then mentioned in the second period that Mika and Kreider weren't getting a whole lot of 5v5 time at that point in the game, although Mika ended up with 22 minutes plus at the end of this one. And then we had going into the third period, I thought this was interesting as well. Joe shared this stat. Lafreniere to that point in the game, in the first two periods combined, had played a grand total of just 7 minutes and 52 seconds. And at that point, Kreider was at 8:07. And I have to laugh because Joe points that out. The lack of ice time for those two. And, you know, Sam's always positive, and that's great. He doesn't want to like go after these guys too much, although even he couldn't help himself during November and December for certain portions of some of those games. But Joe points out the lack of ice time for Lafreniere and Kreider, and Sam just goes, not a lot of time. I'm going to miss that, man. That's another like whole other side story of this entire lackluster season that we're getting toward the end of for the Rangers. This is Sam Rosen's swan song, man. You just wish he could go out with a more fun season than what we're currently seeing. And I mean, who knows? They could still make the playoffs, but it's quite the uphill battle at this point. But as far as Lafreniere and Kreider, I mean, they were both ghosts in this game. I have no issue whatsoever with the two of them losing ice time. Lafreniere at the end of this game ended up with 12 minutes, 36 seconds. That is the second least amount of time on the ice for Lafreniere in a game this season. Now, Kreider, his time actually kind of spiked in the third period. He got more time on the ice slightly in the third period than he did in the first two periods combined. The two power plays, I think, helped that along a little bit at the end of the game there. He ends up with 16-15. But, yeah, again, no issue with the two of them losing ice time. Although the one thing you could say is that nobody on the Rangers really played great in this game, so nobody really deserved to lose ice time any more than anybody else. But I don't know, man. They're two of the biggest infractors, if that's a word, in recent games here for the Rangers. And, you know, speaking of the Rangers making mistakes and playing lethargic hockey and being outworked, what in the world has happened to Alexis Lafreniere? Is that an unfair question at this point? Did he really sign his contract and just put his feet up? You know, when that first happened, he signs the contract extension, then he goes into a little bit of a funk. I wrote it off pretty quickly. Like, okay, you know what? It's a little bit of a scoring drought. He's not playing his best. He'll figure it out. He had a great season the year before. He was off to a great season this year. He'll eventually get it back together and get it going. We're still waiting. We're still waiting for Lafreniere to get back to the form that he showed last season, certainly in the playoffs last season, and at the very, very start of this season before he signed that contract extension. As far as like the timing of the extension being signed and how he's played since then, it's getting borderline impossible to try to just write that off as a coincidence. The Lafreniere contract extension was announced on October 26th. It's been more than 3 months since that contract extension was signed, and Lafreniere has basically played lackluster hockey ever since. I mean, you'll get a moment every now and then. Every once in a while, he'll be on the score sheet, but for the most part, this is just not the same player that we saw before that extension was signed. In the 46 games, keep that in mind. That's interesting in its own right. 46 games have been played since that extension, and in that time, Lafreniere has 10 goals, 14 assists. But it's more than just the lack of points. He just doesn't seem like the same dynamic player, just doesn't seem as dialed in, as focused, as determined as he was before that contract extension was signed. And honestly, this is something that we got to talk about in greater detail. And we got some time on our hands coming up because obviously we get the 2-week break for the Four Nations face-off. And we'll talk about that tournament a little bit too, but we're going to keep the attention mainly on the Rangers. This Lafreniere situation needs a deep dive because I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. But, there was a play in this game while we're talking about Lafreniere where he really just frankly messed up, just didn't compete as hard as he needed to. It was the second goal that the Penguins scored, the goal by Raquel. So the Penguins basically go coast to coast. Lafreniere is just gliding back into the Rangers zone, not even moving his legs. Raquel is absolutely flying like he's fired out of a cannon up the left side. So he's past Lafreniere, receives a pass. I mean, he's wide open. He buries his shot, completely uncontested. That tied the game at 2-2. Now, to be completely fair, I have no clue whatsoever what Will Borgen was doing on this play either, because he was in position. He was on his side. And for some reason during the rush, he all of a sudden just made a beeline to his left. And Miller was there. I mean, Miller was at least in position. I don't think he really needed help. And certainly you're not going to do that and leave your side of the net completely uncovered, which is what he did. So bad play by Borgen, bad play by Lafreniere, mistakes, sloppiness, lack of energy. I mean, it all ties into what we're talking about in this entire episode. It's just a game where you could not go out there if you're the Rangers and have a lack of compete. And that's exactly what happened. And we're getting to the point where it shouldn't even be that surprising. But in just a minute, we're going to talk a little bit about this upcoming game against the Blue Jackets and whether Laviolette's job could potentially be on the line in this game. It's not as out there as it might sound. No guarantees he'll be fired if they lose this game, but we'll discuss it in greater detail in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode here by talking a little bit about this upcoming game against the Columbus Blue Jackets on Saturday at 7 p.m. As of the moment that I hit record, and it is, what day is it? It's Friday night here. And to this point, again, when I hit record, the Rangers had not announced a starting goalie for this game. Coming into this back-to-back, I kind of had a question in my own head here. Like, should the Rangers just go all in for these two games? They're massive games. We know that. And just go with Igor Shesterkin for both games of the back-to-back. Now, on one hand, Jonathan Quick is, you want to use him. He's certainly one of the better backups in the league. I think that can be pretty safely said at this point. And despite that, I kind of had this idea like, well, maybe we should just go with Igor for both games. Let's just push all the chips in. We're not messing around here. We're not taking any prisoners. These are both massive games, and let's go with our franchise goalie. And forget about the back-to-back. Who cares for a situation like this? Especially when you got 2 weeks off if you're Igor Shesterkin after this back-to-back here. But I'm not even so sure. Like, forget about the back-to-back. Forget about, Jonathan Quick and if he deserves a game or not. I'm not sure that's the way to go with Igor Shesterkin right now because he's just not playing well. And honestly, you watch this game, I don't think Igor was anywhere near the biggest problem in this game. And in fact, you could probably make a pretty decent case that he was one of the better Rangers on the ice in this game. He did make some really nice saves, particularly early in this game. By that same token, though, you look at the 3 goals the Penguins scored, and there were mistakes made on them. Certainly the goal by Raquel that we just covered in the last section. I don't know that any of them were just like completely unstoppable. They kind of just went right through him, like under his arm and, under the blocker, whatever it might have been. He's just not playing his best right now. And at a certain point, I think it's almost like, yeah, maybe just throw Jonathan Quick back out there. You look at the last handful of games here. If I can do some quick math in my head here, I'm almost positive that in the last 5 games combined, I believe Igor has given up 24 goals. That does not sound like the resume of a goalie that's about to be the highest paid netminder in the history of this sport. I mean, we're just being honest here, right? And again, there's times certainly this season where the Rangers have defended terribly and they've hung him out to dry. But when you're looked at as the best goalie or one of the best goalies in the league, and you're going to be the highest paid goalie in the league by a long shot, I think you got to keep a few more of these pucks out than what we've been seeing from Igor Shesterkin recently. I think the recent game against Boston, not the one that the Rangers won, but the one that they lost. So the second most recent game against the Bruins, about a week ago, whatever it was. Igor in that game allowed 5 goals. And none of them were like ridiculously soft. But I don't think any of them were like completely unstoppable either. Maybe there was one that like, that would have been a really amazing save had he made it. That's what I'm seeing recently, though. It's not necessarily that Igor's giving up like a bunch of like just alarming 5-alarm softy kind of goals, but he's not making the big save either. He's not making saves that you expect him to make, and he's not making saves that certainly we've seen him make in the past. And there were times where he has, in this game in particular. This is a weird game for Igor because I feel like he made better saves than any of the 3 goals that he allowed. Like, if he had made the saves that on any of the goals that the Penguins scored in this game, they wouldn't have been as good as some of the saves that he did make. So it was kind of a strange night for Igor Shesterkin. But that's kind of where things are right now. Like, I'm almost at the point where, like, you know what? Just go with Quick. Go with Quick in the next game. Quick is gonna understand the gravity of the situation, I think, and he's gonna go out there and compete as hard as he can. And he knows that this is the time to empty the tank. The Four Nations face-off is right in front of them. He knows what a big game this is going to be for the Rangers as they try to scratch and claw their way back into the playoff chase. The Blue Jackets are one of the teams ahead of the Rangers right now. But that also leads me to the next point that I want to make here. This game is massive because, first of all, just look at the standings, right? The Rangers have to chase down some of these teams that they're trying to catch for a playoff spot. But beyond that, you've also got a situation here where there's about to be a 2-week break. And if you're going to make some significant changes and shake things up a little bit, that might be the time to do it. Peter Laviolette, he survived a 4-19 stretch earlier this season. So that makes me think that he will probably close out the season as the Ranger head coach. But if there's ever a time down the stretch here where you might think about making a change, it might be during this 2-week break here. And if the Rangers lose to the Blue Jackets, that becomes, I think, a much bigger possibility than it would be if the Rangers beat the Blue Jackets. If the Rangers beat the Jackets here, as bad as this game was against the Penguins, especially if they beat the Jackets in regulation, because that prevents them from getting even 1 point. But that would mean that the Rangers head into this break having won 3 out of their last 4 games, gotten a total of 6 out of a possible 8 points. That's not so bad, right? It's not terrible. And certainly, if Peter Laviolette can survive 4-19 earlier this season, he's going to survive 3-1 going into the Four Nations face-off. But if they lose this game and they lose 2 in a row, and we're all excited, we think like the Rangers might go into this break with a 4-game winning streak, and instead of that, you go into it with just a 2-2 streak, and you've lost your last 2 games. Yeah, that might change things. That might cause Peter Laviolette to be on thinner ice than he otherwise would be. And that could also mean that Drury says, you know what, I've seen enough. We're selling. We're going to move guys like Riley Smith, Ryan Lindgren, Jimmy Vesey's a UFA as well, possibly some other players too. But I think those are the big 3 because they're the impending UFAs for the Rangers. And if the Rangers do fall out of it, there's really no sense in holding on to really any of those players because I don't think any of them are all that likely to be back next season. But we'll see. Massive game against the Blue Jackets. I know I've said that over and over and over. This is a massive game. That's a massive game. That's going to be a massive game. This is absolutely huge going into the Four Nations face-off. So despite how bad this was, I'm still looking forward to it. We'll see how it goes. Probably going to be a dramatic game no matter what happens in it. But the Rangers need to bring a hell of a lot bigger compete level than what we saw against the Penguins here because the Blue Jackets are going to. They're ahead of the Rangers in the standings. And they're right there. I think they're like 1 point out of the second wild card right now. Give or take, they're right in the mix, just like a lot of teams are. So, yep, massive game for both teams. And we'll see if the Rangers can learn their lesson, forget about this game, and move on and get a big 2 points right before the break that is coming up here for this team. But that'll do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that is @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.